Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Wyman. Again, here for macroeconomics. We're moving on to chapter 9, and we're going to be talking about the Keynesian model in action. What we're going to do today is a little bit different. I'm going to review a few things from the chapter, not the whole chapter, but a few key points. And then at the end of the review, I'm going to go over one of your homework problems so you can see exactly how to do that problem. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen with you. And okay, here we go. So this is chapter 9, and we're going to move forward to this. Okay, so why can government spending be considered an autonomous expenditure? It's autonomous because our government officials sometimes, and most of the time actually, make spending decisions for political reasons, not for things that are happening in the economy all the time. Sometimes they do, but oftentimes they're just political. So a political decision would be something like COVID, for example. Right now, there's some still government is sending out relief checks still to some portions of the society, but not all. And that's really a political decision because right now there are a lot of jobs. There are more jobs available than people to fill them. So the government really should be pulling back on those relief checks because people can work. So that would be an example of a political decision, okay? So what is the aggregate expenditures function? And we're going to focus mostly on this today. And we're going to do some formulas and things like that. So the aggregate expenditures function is the total spending in an economy at different levels of real GDP. And if you don't know what real GDP is, go back in your book and read it. And keep in mind, this is very important. Prices remain stable. They remain the same when you're talking about aggregate functions at different levels of real GDP. So you have to say like, okay, if real GDP is 10,000 and what the prices are one thing, if GDP is 12,000, the prices stay the same. But how does that affect the economy if GDP raises or lowers? Okay, so what's the formula for aggregate expenditures? So AE means aggregate expenditure, AE, right, equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So hopefully you've seen this formula before. And what this means is aggregate expenditures equals consumption spending, investment, government spending, and net exports. So exports minus imports. So X minus M is net exports. Okay, so that's the formula. And you can go back here and you can, use your book when you're doing your work, whether you're taking a test or your homework, make sure you're using your book and the resources that are available to you. By the way, this is a modified PowerPoint. The full PowerPoint is still in Moodle for you, okay? What is the result of unplanned inventory investment depletion? So businesses expand production, which results in an increase in real GDP and employment. Now, the way this is worded, I thought was a little confusing for people who don't know economics, and even for people that do. I think the way that some of the economic information is given out, I think it's kind of convoluted. But if you break this down, and it says, what is the result of unplanned inventory investment depletion? So depletion means using up, right? So think of this as businesses using up inventory to make their products. By doing this, real GDP increases because consumption increases, and employment increases because businesses have to hire more employees to make the products. So this is what happens. This is the result of it. Businesses using up their inventory to make products When more products are on the market, GDP increases because consumption increases and employment increases because production has to be kept at that level because of supply and demand, okay? So what is the result of unplanned inventory investment accumulation? So accumulation means keeping it to yourself, right? You're accumulating, you're getting things together. Businesses reduce production, which results in a decrease in real GDP and employment. So think of this as businesses stocking inventory, and inventory is an investment. This decreases real GDP because there are less products to consume, so less purchasing happens. And since the business is not increasing production, they do not have to hire additional employees, okay? So this is just a roundabout way of saying this sentence in black, but to me, it's clearer. You're saying what you are doing rather than what you're not doing. Now, I wanted to keep this in here because this chart will be very important for your homework. This item 8 here, direction of real GDP and employment. In your homework, it's going to be asking you about this. So you can use this as an example. So unplanned inventory investment, depletion is a minus, accumulation is a plus. If it's a minus, you're going to increase GDP. If it's a 0, it's an equilibrium. And if it's plus, it's decrease. So this is very important. So just so that you have a way of, looking at something that can give you a hand when you're doing your homework. I want you to do well on your homework and in your tests too. So you just want to think about that. And also this has right here what your, consumption, investment, government, net exports. So these are the same titles, right? And then your aggregate expenditures. So you can see how this chart works. Okay, so what is the spending multiplier? Now, this is something that I think may be a little confusing to some of you. I know when I first learned about it, it was confusing. So the spending multiplier is the ratio of the change in real GDP to an initial change in any component of aggregate expenditures, including consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. So we're going to look at an example of how we can do that. So the spending multiplier effect of a change in government spending, this is the causation change. There's an initial increase in government spending, operates through a multiplier, larger increase in aggregate expenditures. So here is the spending multiplier effect. Okay, so if the government's spending money, right, we have round 1, the government decides to spend money. So there's new spending of 500, this is supposed to be billions of dollars. What are they going to spend this money on? Infrastructure, right? Bridges, national defense, roads, whatever, airports, travel, all kinds of things are included in infrastructure. So who's going to do this work? Households, right? So the government is going to spend this 500 billion. Consumption, the households are going to receive the 500 billion, but they're only going to spend half of it. And they're going to spend half of that on houses, cars, groceries, anything, whatever the households buy. Then whatever these people are buying goes down to the people who are selling it, realtors, auto workers, grocers, others. They receive the 250, but they're only going to spend half of it. Half of that goes to the construction workers, auto workers, farmers, etc. They receive the 62.5 and they spend half. And it just continues into this downward spiral at 50% until you reach the total spending of 1,000 billion. Oops, sorry. Oops. There we are. I didn't mean to do that. So what I wanted to point out to you here is, why is this breaking down by 1/2? And it's because that it's calculated, the multiplier is calculated at 0.5. And this is done in Exhibit 6 in your text. So you can go back to Exhibit 6 to see why it's half, but that's why it's half here. It's not half every time. So you have to calculate the multiplier. But this is how it would work. So say this was 25%, right? Instead of half here, they would get 500, but they'd only spend 25% instead of 50%. Okay. So this is the relationship between the marginal propensity to consume, which we've had this in a previous chapter, and the marginal propensity to save. So MPC is consume, MPS is save, and the spending multiplier. This is how you calculate the spending multiplier. So the spending multiplier is 1, this slash line means divide, divided by 1 minus MPC. So in this case, it's 1 divided by 1 minus 0.90 equals 1 divided by 0.10 equals 10. And the spending multiplier is calculated by 1 divided by the MPS. So 1 divided by 0.10 equals 10. So you can see this is the spending multiplier. And you would do this right down the line for each of these. Sorry, I'm getting a frog in my throat. I'm talking too fast, I guess. So that's how you calculate the spending multiplier. And then what is the tax multiplier? The tax multiplier is the change. Everything is change when it comes to economics. The change in aggregate expenditures, which is total spending, results from an initial change in taxes. So the tax multiplier equals 1 minus the spending multiplier. So how is the tax multiplier used to determine the change in real GDP? Change in taxes, this is the delta sign that means change, times the tax multiplier equals change in real GDP. So let's look at the problem from your homework. This is chapter 9, homework problem 4. And this is the expenditures gap. So the following graph shows aggregate expenditures line AE for an economy where current equilibrium output is $450 billion and full employment output is $700 billion. So when you look at your chart, you're going to see the line here and you're going to move it up to here, right? AE1 to AE2. So to calculate the GDP gap, we're going to say we have 700 billion minus 450 billion. So the gap is 250 billion. The economy is experiencing a negative GDP gap because its full employment output of 700 billion is greater than its equilibrium level of output of 450 billion. So it's negative. In this case, equilibrium output is 250 billion below full employment output. So how do we get this? We get the 250 by subtracting 450 from 700. So then we have to calculate another number. So to calculate the amount needed to close the gap, we have to look at the vertical axis, which is this, the aggregate expenditures axis right here, vertical. The initial line, AE1, is right here. So this is at 275 billion. The new line, AE2, is at 425 billion. So 425 billion minus 275 billion is 150 billion. $150 billion increase in spending must occur to close the gap. So right here, you can see the difference. To calculate the spending multiplier for this economy, 250 billion, which is the change in real GDP, divided by 150 billion, which is the change in aggregate expenditures, 250 divided by 150 equals 1.667 spending multiplier. Okay, so spend a little time with this, look at the figures, and see how things are shaking out here, but this is your problem actually solved. So you should have no trouble with problem 4. All right, that is the end of this lecture. I know that this is going to be due after break, so hopefully you'll see it and you will benefit from it. And I will see you on the next round of lectures. All right, take care.